The great hall of Harmony's Gate had never been so quiet. 200 alien leaders sat in their floating chairs, staring at the holographic message that hung in the air before them. The words seemed impossible, yet there they were, glowing in soft blue light. I, Yuna of House Veltar, daughter of High Admiral Minnow, formally announce my intention to bond with the human male Do-Yoon Kim of New Sol Colony. Counselor Vex of the Montari Empire was the first to break the silence. His 4 arms waved in confusion as he spoke. This must be some kind of joke. The Veltari do not mate outside their species. They never have. It is no joke, said Admiral Crane, his scales shifting from green to dark red. I received the message directly from Admiral Minho himself. He is not pleased. The hall erupted into chaos. Dozens of species began talking at once, their various languages creating a symphony of disbelief. The Veltari were known throughout the galaxy for their pride and their pure bloodlines. They had ruled their empire for over 3,000 years without a single interspecies marriage. Their children were always perfect, tall, graceful, with skin that changed colors like living crystal, and minds that could speak without words. And now one of them wanted to marry a human. Humans were still new to the galaxy. Only 200. Years had passed since they first left their home planet Earth. Most species saw them as useful workers, strong enough for heavy labor, smart enough to follow orders, but nothing special. They lived such short lives, barely 80 years if they were lucky. Their technology was simple compared to the great civilizations. They had no telepathic powers, no special abilities that made other species respect them. What could she possibly see in one of them? Asked Counselor Nira, her tentacles curling with disgust. Humans are so basic. On the other side of the galaxy, the news reached New Sol Colony through the standard communication channels. The small mining station orbited, a lonely planet where humans dug deep holes to find rare metals. Most of the workers had never seen an alien in person, except for the occasional trade ships that came to buy their ore. Do-Yoon Kim sat in the station's cafeteria, staring at his dinner tray without really seeing it. His friend Jiho nudged him with an elbow. Hey, did you hear the news? Some alien princess wants to marry a human guy. Can you believe that? Do-Yoon's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. What? Yeah, it's all over the feeds. Some fancy alien lady from that crystal skin species. The Vel something. She wants to marry a human named. Jiho pulled out his datapad and squinted at the screen. Do-Yoon Kim. Hey, that's your name too. What are the odds? The fork fell from Do-Yoon's hand and clattered on his tray. Around them, other workers were starting to look at their datapads and tablets. Slowly, heads began to turn toward their table. Do-Yoon, said Soman, the station's communication officer, as she hurried over to their table. We need to talk. Right now. The next few hours passed like a strange dream. Do-Yoon found himself in the station commander's office, facing a wall of screens showing news reports from across the galaxy. Every channel seemed to be talking about the same thing, the impossible announcement that had shocked civilized space. Is it true? Asked Commander Park, a weathered man who had run the mining station for 20 years. Do you really know this alien woman? Do-Yoon nodded slowly. She was here 3 months ago, part of some inspection tour. We ... We talked a few times. Talked? Jiho's voice went up an octave. You talked to an alien princess and never mentioned it. She didn't seem like a princess, Do-Yoon said quietly. She was just ... nice. She asked a lot of questions about how things worked. She helped me fix the oxygen recycler when it broke down. On the screens, news reporters from dozens of species were trying to explain the shocking announcement. A Thrakari, journalist with purple fur, was speaking rapidly into her camera. Never, in recorded galactic history, as a member of the Veltari nobility chosen to mate outside their species. The implications for interspecies relations are staggering. Another screen showed a group of Veltari officials, their crystal skin shifting between angry reds and shocked whites. "This is clearly a temporary madness," one of them was saying. "Young Yuna will come to her senses soon enough." But the most interesting reports came from the human colonies themselves. For the first time in decades, other species were paying attention to humanity, not as workers or soldiers, but as potential equals. Ships from various empires were already heading toward human space, hoping to understand what made this particular human so special. Back on Harmony's Gate, High Admiral Minho sat in his private chambers, staring out at the stars. His daughter's message played over and over in his mind. He had raised Yuna to be perfect, a true Veltari noble with all the grace and intelligence of their people. She could have chosen any male from the finest families in their empire. Instead, she had chosen a maintenance worker from a species most Veltari considered barely above animals. A soft chime announced a visitor. Minho's aide, Captain Wano, entered the room with careful steps. "Sir, the council demands an immediate meeting. They want you to order your daughter to return home at once." "And what if she refuses?" Minho asked without turning around. "Then they want her stripped of rank and title, cast out from Veltari society." Minho's skin shifted to a deep, sad blue. "She is my only child, Wano, the light of my life since her mother died. How can I choose between my daughter and my people?" "Perhaps," Wano said carefully, "the question is not what you will choose, but what this human has that none of our males possess." Meanwhile, on dozens of worlds throughout the galaxy, aliens gathered around their communication devices to watch the unfolding drama. In the markets of Vega Prime, traders placed bets on whether the marriage would actually happen. In the war colleges of the Keth Empire, strategists wondered if this represented a new alliance between humans and Veltari. In the research stations of the Zenti Collective, scientists began studying everything they could find about human psychology and biology, but perhaps the most interested observers were the humans themselves. For 2 centuries, they had been the newcomers, the ones who had to prove themselves worthy of respect. Now, suddenly, one of their own had been chosen by a member of the galaxy's most proud and ancient species. On every human world, in every colony and station, people gathered to watch the news with a mixture of pride and confusion. If a Veltari princess could fall in love with a simple maintenance worker from New Sol, what did that say about humanity's place in the galaxy? As night fell on Harmony's Gate, the great powers of the galaxy prepared for emergency sessions. Ancient alliances would be questioned. New possibilities would be discussed. The balance of power that had held steady for centuries might be about to shift, and at the center of it all was a quiet, human man who fixed broken machines and an alien woman who had seen something in him that no one else could understand. The galaxy was about to learn what that something was. 3 months earlier, the diplomatic transport ship Crystal Dawn had approached New Sol Colony with little fanfare. The inspection tour was routine, a requirement. That kept the peace between the great powers and the smaller human settlements. High Admiral Minho's daughter Yuna had volunteered for the duty, partly to gain experience and partly to escape the suffocating protocols of Veltari court life. Yuna stood on the bridge of her ship, watching the small mining station grow larger. On the view screen, it was nothing impressive, just a collection of metal modules connected by tubes, spinning slowly around a dead planet. Her skin shifted to a mild green, the Veltari color for boredom. "How long must we stay here?" asked her aide, Lieutenant Kyung, his own skin showing the same green tint. "The minimum required time," Yuna replied. "We inspect their facilities, file our report, and leave. Simple." But nothing about her visit would prove simple. The station commander, an older human, named Park, met them at the docking bay with obvious nervousness. He had clearly spent hours preparing for their arrival. His uniform was pressed, his boots polished, and he had probably drilled his staff on proper behavior around Veltari nobility. "Welcome to New Sol Colony, Your Highness," he said with a deep bow. "We are honored by your presence." Yuna noticed how the human workers in the docking bay stopped their tasks to stare at her. Most had probably never seen a Veltari in person. Her crystalline skin caught the light in ways that seemed to fascinate them, and her height, nearly 7 feet tall, made her cower over even the largest humans. The tour began normally enough. Commander Park showed her the living quarters, the command center, the communication arrays. Everything was functional, but basic compared to Veltari technology. The humans used mechanical switches, where her people would use thought-controlled interfaces. They relied on visual displays instead of telepathic data streams. "Primitive," Lieutenant Kyung whispered in their native language. "How do they accomplish anything with such crude tools?" But Yuna found herself oddly interested in the human methods. When Commander Park explained how they had modified their mining equipment to work in the planet's unusual magnetic field, she asked detailed questions. The solution was elegant in its simplicity. They had bypassed the problem entirely instead of fighting it with more complex technology. "Why did you choose this approach?" she asked. Park looked confused. "Well, it was actually one of our engineers who figured it out. Do-Yoon Kim. He said sometimes the easiest answer is the best answer." The tour continued to the engineering section, where the station's most critical systems hummed and clicked in organized chaos. Pipes and cables ran everywhere, and the air smelled of metal and electricity. It was nothing like the clean, silent perfection of Veltari technology. That was when the alarms started. Red lights flashed throughout the station as an automated voice announced the emergency. "Oxygen recycler failure in Section 7. All personnel to emergency stations." Commander Park's face went pale. "The main recycler is down. We have backup systems, but they won't last long with this many people on the station." Yuna watched as humans ran past them, moving with practiced efficiency toward their emergency positions. There was no panic, no screaming, just quick, determined action. Her own people would have handled the crisis with calm calculation, but these humans moved with something else. Urgency, passion. "Can your technology help us?" Park asked hopefully. Yuna activated her diagnostic scanner, a device that could analyze any mechanical system in seconds. The readout appeared in her mind instantly. The recycler's primary processor had failed, and the backup systems were operating at only 30% efficiency. Her scanner could identify the problem perfectly, but the solution required parts and materials that weren't available on the station. "I can tell you what is wrong," she said, "but I cannot fix it with what you have here." That was when she heard a human voice from deeper in the engineering section. "Then we'll have to make what we need." A man emerged from behind a bank of machinery, wearing the simple coveralls of a maintenance worker. He was average height for a human, with dark hair and tired eyes that seemed to take in everything around him. His hands were stained with grease, and his shirt had small burn marks from welding work. "This is Do-Yoon Kim," Park said quickly, "one of our best engineers." Do-Yoon bowed politely to Yuna, but his attention was already focused on the failing systems around them. "The main processor is fried, but the core assembly is still good. If we can bypass the damaged circuits and reroute through the secondary systems." He trailed off, staring at the maze of pipes and wires with an expression Yuna had never seen before. It wasn't the careful calculation her people used when solving problems. It was something more intuitive, like he was seeing patterns that existed only in his mind. "It won't work according to the manual," Lieutenant Kyung said dismissively. The secondary systems aren't designed to handle primary load. You're right, Do-yeon said without looking at him. But manuals are written by people who never had to make things work with spare parts and hope. For the next 18 hours, Yuna watched something that challenged everything she thought she knew about intelligence and problem-solving. Do-yeon worked without stopping, crawling through maintenance tunnels, welding connections that shouldn't have worked, and jury-rigging solutions that made her advanced. Training seemed useless. He didn't use complex calculations or sophisticated tools. Instead, he seemed to understand the station's systems the way a musician understands an instrument, not through technical knowledge alone, but through feel and instinct. When Yuna offered to help with her diagnostic equipment, Do-yeon accepted gratefully. But instead of relying on her scanner's precise readings, he used them as starting points for creative solutions. Where her technology said something was impossible, he found ways to make it work anyway. How do you know that will function? She asked as he connected two systems that were never meant to work together. Do-yeon paused in his work and looked at her with surprise, as if no one had ever asked him that question before. I don't know for sure, he said honestly, but sometimes you have to try things that might not work because the things that definitely should work aren't available. It was such a human answer. Her people would never attempt a solution without being certain of success. Risk was calculated, minimized, controlled. But humans seemed to embrace uncertainty as a tool. As the hours passed, other workers came to help or bring food and water. Yuna noticed how they treated Do-yeon, not as a superior or subordinate, but as a trusted friend. When he asked for help, they gave it without question. When he made a joke to lighten the mood during a difficult moment, they laughed genuinely. Your friend is well liked, she observed to Jiho, who was assisting with the repairs. Do-yeon? Yeah, he's good people, Jiho said simply. He fixed my daughter's toy robot last month. Spent 3 hours on it when he could have been sleeping. That's just who he is. Such a small thing, but it revealed something important. This human didn't just solve mechanical problems. He solved human problems too. He used his skills not for personal gain, but to help others. When the oxygen recycler finally hummed back to life, the entire engineering section erupted in cheers. Humans hugged each other and slapped Do-yeon on the back. Their joy was infectious, filling the air with an energy that made Yuna's skin shift to warm gold, the Veltari color for happiness. How did you know it would work? She asked Do-yeon as the celebration continued around them. He wiped sweat from his forehead and gave her that same honest look. I didn't. But the alternative was giving up, and that wasn't really an option. That night, as her ship prepared to depart, Yuna found herself walking through the station's corridors one more time. She stopped at an observation window that looked out at the planet below, barren, airless, hostile to life. Yet humans had come to this place and built something here. They had taken a dead world and made it productive, useful, alive with purpose. She returned to her ship. Lieutenant Kyung was waiting with their departure clearance. A fascinating primitive culture, he said, though I don't understand how they accomplish anything with such chaotic methods. But Yuna was beginning to understand. She had spent her life in a society that valued perfection, order, and certainty. Everything was planned, predicted, controlled. It was efficient and beautiful, but it was also limiting. When faced with true uncertainty, the kind of problem that had no perfect solution, her people often found themselves paralyzed by their own need for absolute correctness. Humans were different. They didn't need perfect solutions. They needed solutions that worked, even if those solutions were messy, temporary, or technically impossible. They embraced chaos, not because they were primitive, but because chaos sometimes revealed possibilities that order could never find. Over the following weeks, As her ship continued its inspection tour, Yuna found herself thinking about the quiet engineer who had saved his station with spare parts and intuition. She began to see human colonies not as crude settlements, but as examples of adaptability and creativity. When her tour ended and she returned home to the crystal spires of the Veltari capital, the contrast was startling. Everything was perfect, beautiful, and utterly predictable. For the first time in her life, the message arrived at New Seoul, colony on a secure diplomatic channel that made the station's communication equipment spark and hiss. Commander Park read it 3 times before calling Do-Yoon to his office. "They want to test you," Park said, sliding the data pad across his desk. "The Veltari Empire. If you're serious about marrying their princess, you have to prove you're worthy." Do-Yoon read the formal language with growing confusion. Words like strategic assessment and cognitive integration protocols meant nothing to him. "What kind of tests?" "The kind that no outsider has ever been given," Park replied grimly. "The kind that even most Veltari males fail." Within days, ships began arriving in the system. Not just Veltari vessels, but representatives from dozens of species who wanted to witness the spectacle. The galaxy's most powerful beings were coming to watch a human maintenance worker attempt the impossible. The tests would take place aboard Harmony's Gate, the massive space station that served as the galaxy's diplomatic center. As Do-Yoon's transport ship approached the station, he pressed his face to the small porthole and tried to comprehend what he was seeing. The structure was larger than most moons, its surface covered in gleaming towers and domes that housed representatives from every known civilization. "Nervous?" asked Captain Tai Wu, the human military officer who had been assigned to escort Do-Yoon. "Terrified," Do-Yoon answered honestly. "Good, means you're paying attention." The docking bay where they landed was filled with news crews and officials from various species. Cameras flashed and alien voices called out questions in languages Do-Yoon couldn't understand. He had never seen so many different kinds of beings in one place, some tall and graceful, others short and wide, a few that seemed to be made of living metal or pure energy. High Admiral Minho waited at the center of the chaos, his crystalline skin shifting between formal silver and barely controlled anger. He was even taller than his daughter, with the bearing of someone who had commanded fleets across the galaxy. When he looked at Do-Yoon, his expression was carefully neutral. "So you are the human who thinks he can marry my daughter," Minho said, in perfect human language. "I'm the human who loves your daughter," Do-Yoon replied quietly. "Whether I'm worthy of her is something I'll have to prove." Something flickered in Minho's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or grudging respect. "Indeed you will. Follow me." The testing center was a vast chamber filled with advanced Veltari technology. Holographic displays showed star maps and fleet formations. Neural interface helmets hung from the ceiling like mechanical spiders. In the observation galleries above, hundreds of aliens settled in to watch the proceedings. "The first test is strategic mastery," announced Counselor Hyuk, an elderly Veltari whose skin had turned the deep blue of advanced age. "You will command a simulated fleet against our finest admirals. Victory is not expected, but we will observe how your mind approaches tactical problems." Do-Hyun was fitted with a neural interface that felt cold and strange against his skull. Suddenly, his mind was filled with information: ship positions, weapon ranges, supply lines, and enemy movements. It was overwhelming, like trying to drink from a waterfall. His opponents were 3 Veltari admirals who had never lost a simulation. They commanded their virtual fleets with perfect precision, executing textbook maneuvers that had been refined over centuries of warfare. Their ships moved in elegant formations, striking with calculated efficiency. Do-Hyun lost badly. His fleet was scattered within the first hour, his supply lines cut, his command ship destroyed. But something strange happened during the battle. While he was losing the war, he managed to rescue civilian populations that the simulation had marked as acceptable losses. His scattered ships regrouped not to attack the enemy, but to evacuate refugee vessels that other commanders would have. Ignored. Inefficient, one of the Veltari admirals commented. He prioritizes individual lives over strategic objectives. Yes, Minho said quietly. He does. The second test was even more alien to Do-Yan's experience. He was connected directly to Veltari computer networks, his human brain interfacing with technology that operated on principles he couldn't begin to understand. The advanced systems were designed for Veltari minds, telepathic, logical, perfectly. Ordered at first, nothing happened. Do-Yun's thoughts bounced off the alien technology like water off glass. The watching crowd began to murmur that the test was pointless. Human brains simply weren't compatible with such advanced systems. Then something unexpected occurred. Do-Yun's different neural patterns began to reveal flaws in the Veltari networks. His chaotic human thoughts found gaps and inefficiencies that the perfectly logical alien minds had missed. He started asking questions that no Veltari had ever thought to ask. Why do you route all communications through the central hub? He wondered aloud. Wouldn't it be faster to create direct connections between nodes? The Veltari technicians looked at each other in confusion. Their system had worked flawlessly for centuries. But as they examined Do-Yun's suggestions, they realized he was right. His primitive brain had spotted improvements that their advanced civilization had overlooked. Remarkable, whispered Dr. Yunji, a Veltari scientist who had been studying the test results. His cognitive patterns are completely different from ours, but that difference allows him to see things we cannot. The final test was the most personal and potentially devastating. High Admiral Minho himself would enter Do-Yun's mind telepathically, examining his thoughts and memories to understand his true motivations. It was an intimate violation that few non-Veltari could survive without psychological damage. This will hurt, Minho warned as he placed his hands on Do-Yun's temples. I will see everything, your fears, your failures, your deepest secrets. Are you prepared for that? Do-Yun thought of Yuna's laugh, the way her skin shifted to warm gold when she was happy, the genuine curiosity in her eyes when she asked about human customs. Yes, he said, I'm ready. The mental connection was like ice water flooding his brain. Minho's consciousness moved through Do-Yun's memories with surgical precision, examining every thought and feeling. He saw Do-Yun's childhood in the slums of Old Seoul on Earth, where his parents had worked 3 jobs, each just to put food on the table. He witnessed the factory accident that had killed them both, leaving 12-year-old Do-Yun to care for his younger sister Hana. He observed years of struggle, Do-Yun working in mines and factories, sending every spare credit to pay for Hana's education while he himself dropped out of school. He saw the quiet sacrifices, the missed opportunities, the dreams deferred so that someone else could have a better life. But he also saw strength. When other workers were injured, Do-Yun stayed, late to help them. When equipment broke down, he fixed it not because he had to, but because leaving it broken would make everyone's job harder. When his sister graduated from university and tried to thank him, he had simply hugged her and said he was proud. Most importantly, Minho saw Do-Yun's memories of Yuna, not the princess, not the alien nobility, but the curious woman who had crawled through maintenance tunnels to help save the station. He remembered how she had asked genuine questions about human culture, how she had shared her own food when the cafeteria ran out, how she had laughed at his terrible jokes, even though she didn't understand the cultural references. You love her, Minho said, his mental voice filled with surprise. More than anything, Do-Yun replied. But if being with me would hurt her or make her unhappy, I would walk away. Her well-being matters more than my feelings. Minho probed deeper, looking for deception or hidden motives. He found none. This human genuinely cared nothing for Yuna's wealth or status. He loved her for her kindness, her intelligence, and her willingness to see the universe through different eyes. But there was something else in Do-Yun's mind that shocked the Valtari admiral. When faced with impossible problems, this human didn't despair or give up. He simply started trying solutions until something worked. When others said something couldn't be done, he heard it as a challenge to find a new way. You failed all 3 tests, Minho said as he withdrew from Do-Yun's mind. The human sat slumped in his chair, exhausted by the mental intrusion. I know, Do-Yun said quietly. And yet, ... Minho paused, his skin shifting through a rainbow of colors as he processed what he had learned. You showed qualities that none of our males possess. You prioritize compassion over efficiency. You find solutions where others see only problems. You love without condition or expectation of reward. He looked up at the observation galleries where hundreds of alien dignitaries waited for his verdict. The tests were designed to measure Veltari virtues. But perhaps it is time we learn to value different kinds of strength. The crowd erupted into chaos as species debated what this meant. Some called it a failure that proved human inferiority. Others argued it revealed the limitations of traditional thinking. But in the front row of the gallery, one figure sat in satisfied silence. Yuna's skin glowed with the warm gold of pure happiness. Her father had finally seen what she had recognized from the beginning. That strength came in many forms, and sometimes the most powerful force in the universe was simply caring enough to try. The galaxy was about to learn that love could indeed conquer the stars. But first, it had to overcome the prejudices. The news of Do-Yun's tests spread across the galaxy faster than light itself. Within hours of the announcement, diplomatic channels buzzed with activity as every major species tried to understand what had just happened. A human had failed every traditional measure of worthiness, yet somehow earned the approval of High Admiral Minho himself. On the trading world of Nexus Prime, alien merchants gathered around public screens to watch endless analysis programs. The Thrakari news anchor, her purple fur bristling with excitement, struggled to explain the unprecedented situation. What we witnessed yesterday challenges fundamental assumptions about intelligence and capability, she reported. The human subject demonstrated problem-solving methods that our experts are calling chaos-based innovation, finding solutions through unpredictable approaches that logical minds would never attempt. In the research stations orbiting Vega, Dr. Yunji worked frantically to compile her observations into a comprehensive report. Her data showed something that made her crystalline skin shift to the deep blue of intense concentration. Human neural patterns weren't just different from Veltari minds, they were complementary. Where Veltari thinking was precise and controlled, human thoughts were flexible and adaptive. Together, they could solve problems that neither species could handle alone. This is extraordinary, she told her research team. We have been studying intelligence as if there were only one correct way to think. But what if diversity of thought is actually an advantage? Her preliminary report sent shockwaves through academic circles across the galaxy. Universities that had dismissed human psychology as primitive suddenly found themselves hosting emergency conferences. The Federation of Sciences announced new research grants specifically for studying alternative cognitive approaches. But the most dramatic changes were happening in human space itself. Captain Taiwu received urgent messages from Earth Command as reports flooded in from every human colony. For the first time in centuries, alien ships were approaching human worlds not to buy raw materials or hire workers, but to request consultation on problems their own advanced technologies couldn't solve. They want our help, Taiwu reported. to Earth's colonial council in amazement. The Montari Empire is asking human engineers to examine their factory designs. The Zenti Collective wants our psychologists to study their social problems. Even the proud Altarians are requesting human advisors for their space exploration program. Counselor Jinwu, Earth's representative to the Galactic Council, found himself suddenly popular in ways he had never experienced. Species that had barely acknowledged human existence were now inviting him to strategy meetings and policy discussions. What changed? Asked Ambassador Chun during one of their secure communications. Dayun changed everything, Jinwu replied. He showed them that our way of thinking isn't wrong. It's just different. And sometimes different is exactly what you need. The shift was most visible in the Rim territories, where human colonies had always struggled to gain respect from their alien neighbors. Mining Station Alpha 7, similar to New Sol Colony, received a visit from Corvan engineers who had been unable to solve a recurring equipment failure. Within 3 hours, human mechanics had the system running better than it had in years. How did you know to try that? Asked the lead Corvan engineer, his tentacles quivering with confusion. We didn't know, replied the human foreman with a shrug. But when the standard solution doesn't work, you try something else. The Corvan engineer's report back to his superiors used words like intuitive problem-solving and creative adaptation. Within weeks, Corvan Industrial was offering partnership agreements to human colonies throughout their sector. Similar stories began appearing across the galaxy. On research stations, human scientists were asking questions that revealed flaws in theories that had been accepted for centuries. In diplomatic meetings, human negotiators were finding compromises that more logical minds had dismissed as impossible. In emergency situations, human rescue workers were saving lives through methods that violated every safety protocol, but somehow worked. The galaxy was discovering what Una had seen from the beginning, that humans possessed a kind of intelligence that complemented and enhanced the abilities of other species. But not everyone was pleased with these developments. In the war rooms of the Keth Empire, military strategists watched the rising status of humanity with growing alarm. Admiral Gorth, his scarred face grim with concern, addressed his senior staff. If humans gain true acceptance in the galactic community, and if they ally formally with the Valtari through this marriage, the balance of power will shift dramatically, he warned. Our influence depends on keeping other species divided and weak. This union threatens everything we have built. General Vash, her cybernetic implants glowing red with anger, slammed her metal fist on the conference table. Then we stop it. One assassination properly timed ends this threat before it begins. 2 assassinations, Gorth corrected. The human and the Veltari female. Make it look like extremists from both sides. Drive a wedge between the species instead of allowing them to unite. Across Keth space, sleeper agents received coded messages. Weapons were prepared. False identities were created. The most dangerous intelligence operatives in the galaxy began moving toward Harmony's Gate, where the wedding was scheduled to take place in just 2 weeks. Meanwhile, on New Sol Colony, Do-Yoon sat in the station's observation lounge, trying to process everything that had happened. Jiho found him there, staring out at the stars with an expression of complete bewilderment. So, Jiho said, settling into the chair beside his friend, how does it feel to be the most famous human in the galaxy? Confusing, Do-Yoon admitted. 3 months ago, I was just a guy who fixed broken equipment. Now they're saying I represent some new kind of thinking that's going to change everything. Maybe you always did, Gio suggested. Maybe the rest of us just never noticed. Do-Yoon's communication device chimed with an incoming message from Una. Her hologram appeared in the vent, air between them, her skin glowing with the warm gold of happiness mixed with excitement. My love, she said, her voice carrying clearly despite the vast distance between them. "The preparations are almost complete. In 2 weeks, we will be bonded before representatives of every major species in the galaxy. Are you ready for that?" Do-Yun smiled at her image. "I'm ready to marry you. Everything else is just details." "Important details," Yuna replied with a laugh. "My father says the guest list has grown to over 3,000 beings. Kings and emperors are coming to witness our ceremony. As long as you're there, I don't care if the entire galaxy is watching." After Yuna's message ended, Jiho shook his head in amazement. "You do realize what you've done, don't you? You've made humanity matter. For the first time since we left Earth, other species see us as equals." "I didn't do anything special," Do-Yun protested. "I just tried to solve problems the way I always do." "Exactly. And that's what makes it special." Across the galaxy, wedding preparations began in earnest. Harmony's Gate was transformed into a massive celebration venue, with decorations representing every major species and culture. Diplomats worked frantically to negotiate seating arrangements that wouldn't start interstellar wars. Security forces from dozens of worlds coordinated their efforts to protect the most important guests in known space. But in the shadows, other preparations were being made. Keth assassins studied building plans and security protocols. Weapons were smuggled aboard cargo ships. False identities were carefully constructed to pass even the most sophisticated screening systems. The wedding of Yuna and Do-Yun had become more than a celebration of love. It was a symbol of changing relationships between species, of new possibilities for cooperation and understanding. For some, it represented hope for a better future. For others, it was a threat that had to be eliminated at any cost. Dr. Yunji published her final report on the implications of human Veltari cooperation just days before the wedding. Her conclusions were revolutionary. The galaxy as operated under the assumption that advancement requires uniformity of thought. But our observations suggest that diversity of cognitive approaches leads to exponentially greater problem-solving capability. The union of these two species may represent the next step in galactic evolution. As ships from across the galaxy converged on Harmony's Gate for the ceremony, everyone understood that they were witnessing a historical moment. The marriage of one human maintenance worker to one Veltari princess had somehow become the catalyst for a fundamental shift in how the galaxy viewed intelligence, cooperation, and the very nature of civilization itself. Whether that shift would be allowed to continue, or whether it would be stopped by those who feared change, would be determined in the next few days. The entire galaxy held its breath and waited to see which vision of the future would prevail. The great ceremony hall aboard Harmony's Gate had never hosted an event like this. 3,000 beings from across the galaxy filled the vast space, their various forms creating a tapestry of colors, shapes, and sizes that represented the full diversity of civilized space. Ancient enemies sat near each other in careful neutrality. United by their curiosity about this unprecedented union, Do-Yun stood at the altar, wearing a simple suit that looked painfully ordinary next to the elaborate costumes of the alien dignitaries. His sister Hana sat in the front row, tears in her eyes as she watched her brother prepare to marry an alien princess. Beside her, his friends from New Soul Colony looked around in amazement at the grandeur surrounding them. High Admiral Minho took his place at the ceremonial platform, his crystalline skin shifting through formal patterns of silver and blue. As Yuna's father, he would officiate the ceremony according to ancient Veltari traditions. His expression was carefully controlled, but those who knew him could see the pride and concern warring in his eyes. "Beings of the galaxy," Minho announced, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's advanced acoustics, "we gather today to witness a bonding that represents more than the union of two individuals. Today, we celebrate the possibility of understanding between different peoples. In the observation balconies above, news crews from every major species recorded every moment. This was the most watched event in galactic history, with billions of beings across thousands of worlds following the proceedings. But in the shadows of the Great Hall, figures moved with deadly purpose. Keth assassins, disguised as diplomatic. Staff and security personnel had infiltrated the ceremony. Their plan was simple: create chaos during the vows, eliminate both Yuna and Do-Yoon in the confusion, and escape in the panic that would follow. Agent Orcs, the team leader, spoke quietly into his concealed communicator. All units in position, weapons armed. Begin operation on my signal. Yuna appeared at the entrance to the hall, and a collective gasp rose from the assembled crowd. She wore traditional Veltari ceremonial robes that seemed to be made of living. Light, shifting and flowing with every step. Her skin glowed with the pure gold of perfect happiness, and her height and grace made her appear almost otherworldly. But as she walked down the aisle toward Do-Yoon, her eyes were fixed only on him. To her, the thousands of watching aliens, the elaborate decorations, and the historical significance of the moment all faded into background noise. There was only the quiet human man who had shown her that love could exist without conditions or expectations. "She's beautiful," whispered Commander Park to Captain Tai-Woo. "They both are," Tai-Woo replied, watching how Do-Yoon's face lit up as his bride approached. The ceremony began with traditional Veltari rituals that had been performed for over 3,000 years. Yuna and Do-Yoon exchanged crystalline tokens that represented the binding of their life forces. Minho spoke ancient words in the Veltari language, while holographic displays showed the symbolic joining of two souls. Then came the human elements that Yuna had insisted on including. Do-Yoon had spent weeks learning to speak his vows in her native tongue, and when he began to recite them, his pronunciation was far from perfect. But the effort and sincerity behind the words made Yuna's skin glow even brighter. "In your language, and with your customs," he said haltingly, "I promise to stand beside you, to learn from you, and to love you for all the days of my life." It was at that moment that Agent Orcs gave the signal. Execute. The attack came from 6 directions at once. Energy weapons appeared in the hands of disguised assassins as they moved to eliminate their targets. But they had made a crucial miscalculation. They had assumed that humans and Veltari would react to danger the way their own species did, with careful protocols and organized responses. Instead, chaos erupted in a way that no one could have predicted. Do-Yoon didn't freeze or look for escape routes. The moment he saw weapons being drawn, he threw himself toward Yuna, knocking her behind the ceremonial platform. "Get down!" he shouted to the crowd. "Everyone get down!" But instead of panicking, the wedding guests began working together with an efficiency that shocked the attackers. Human security forces, trained to adapt quickly to unexpected situations, immediately began improvising new defensive positions. Veltari telepaths coordinated their responses instantly, sharing information faster than any communication system. High Admiral Minho found himself fighting alongside human marines, his strategic mind perfectly complementing their aggressive tactics. When a Keth assassin tried to flank their position, Minho's telepathic warning allowed the humans to react before the attack could develop. Behind the pillar, Minho projected directly into the mind of Sergeant Kim, one of Do-Yoon's escorts. "God, it," Kim replied aloud, not caring that he couldn't send thoughts back. He and his team moved as one, their actions guided by Veltari intelligence and powered by human determination. Yuna, protected behind the altar, used her telepathic abilities to coordinate the defense of the civilian guests. Her mental voice reached every Veltari in the hall simultaneously, guide the others to safety. Show them the emergency exits. Work with the humans. They know how to protect people. Dr. Yunji, cowering near the front row with other scientists, watched the battle with amazement even through her fear. Humans and Veltari weren't just cooperating. They were enhancing each other's abilities. The combination of Veltari precision and human adaptability created a defensive response that was more effective than either species could have achieved alone. The Keth assassins found themselves facing an enemy they hadn't prepared for. Their intelligence had suggested that mixing two different species would create confusion and slow responses. Instead, they faced a unified force that seemed to anticipate their every move. Agent Orcs, pinned down behind an overturned table, spoke desperately into his communicator. This isn't working. They're fighting like they've trained together for years. Because they're learning from each other in real time, came the reply from his handler. Abort mission. Get out now. But it was too late. The combination of Veltari telepathic coordination and human tactical flexibility had turned the tide completely. Within minutes, all 6 assassins were either captured or dead, their weapons scattered across the ceremonial hall dot as security. Forces began cleaning up the aftermath. Do-Yoon helped Yuna to her feet. Her ceremonial robes were torn and stained, and his suit was rumpled from diving behind cover, but they were both unharmed. Are you all right? He asked, checking her for injuries. I am now, she replied, her skin shifting to the warm gold that meant she felt safe and loved. High Admiral Minho approached them, his own skin showing the deep blue of profound realization. I have fought in dozens of battles, he said quietly, but I have never seen anything like what just happened here. Humans and Veltari fighting as one force, thinking as one mind. It felt natural, admitted Sergeant Kim, who was helping tend to wounded guests. Like we were meant to work together. The ceremony resumed an hour later, after the hall had been secured and the injured had been treated. But something had changed. The attack had been meant to drive the species apart, but instead it had proven that they were stronger together than either could be alone. When Minho finally pronounced, Yuna and Do-Yoon officially bonded, the cheer that rose from the crowd was different from what anyone had expected. It wasn't just celebration of a marriage. It was recognition of a new possibility for galactic civilization. You did it, Jiho said to his friend during the reception afterward. You changed everything. We all did, Do-Yoon replied, watching. As human and Veltari guests mingled freely, sharing stories and laughing together. This is just the beginning. 1 year later, the Human Veltari Cultural Exchange Program had become the most successful diplomatic initiative in galactic history. Joint research stations were producing breakthroughs that neither species could have achieved alone. Military cooperation had led to new defensive strategies that were being adopted by allies across the galaxy. Hana was studying advanced engineering at the Veltari Academy, her human creativity combining with alien precision to create innovations. That amazed her professors. Dr. Yunji had established the first institute for cognitive diversity, where beings from different species learn to understand and appreciate alternative ways of thinking. On New Sol Colony, Jiho and Somin watched the latest news reports about humanity's rising status in galactic affairs. Trade agreements, military alliances, and research partnerships were being signed with species that had barely acknowledged human existence just 2 years earlier. Remember when Do-Yoon was just the guy who fixed the recycler? Somin mused. He still is, Jiho replied with a smile. That's what makes this whole thing work. He never tried to be anything more than himself. Across the galaxy, the marriage of Yuna and Do-Yoon had become a symbol of what was possible when different peoples chose cooperation over competition, understanding over prejudice, and love over fear. The quiet human who fixed broken machines, with spare parts and intuition, had somehow helped fix something much larger. The galaxy's broken assumptions about intelligence, worth, and the value of diversity, that the universe was vast and full of different ways of thinking, living, and solving problems for the first time in centuries.